Right, this is Diablo 4's server slam weekend, so this gives me an opportunity to try out a few GPUs. You know what, I'm gonna go ahead and kick in my average FPS counter, which you can see now, and running out around this town area, which gives a lot on screen, but it'll be more repeatable compared to if I was in combat, although, you know, combat would have more effects on screen, so it's not exactly the same. But the point is, it's a lot more than just standing around on an empty map. We're seeing the GTX 1060 here doing well, and the game system requirements did seem to suggest the game would be extremely scalable. So nice to see the old GTX 1060 here, averaging around 78 FPS around this town, although the 1% lows are dropping to around 46. And what settings and all that are we running at? Well, we're actually doing pretty well here. We're looking at the high preset, which is what the game defaulted to, and this is at 1080p on the 1060. We'll try out some other GPUs in a minute, but first, let's look at how this one's doing in a little more detail. So one thing I'm noticing is that the frame time graph is not super smooth. And like I said, those 1% lows, I'll restart this. As you walk around, if you look at the bottom of the screen, bottom left-hand corner, you can see that graph go by. Spikes on that frame time graph are basically stutters, uneven frame pacing between frames. And so that's a little bit unfortunate. That's the main problem. So we're going to go ahead and see if maybe turning down settings would help a little bit, but it's nice to see the overall performance is at least pretty good here. So we're going to go down to the low settings, reset all the frame rate counters, and you can certainly tell at low settings, especially the textures. Like if you just look at the ground texture right now, it's not as good as what we had before. We'll just leave it at that. Maybe we'll just run around this little loop here. The overall frame rate is now averaging 110. I mean, you can run around other parts of the town and all that. But very, very good overall frame rate. But again, those 1% lows down at about 58 now, and little bits of spikes on the frame time graph, so that's a little unfortunate. But other than that, at least the overall performance is quite high, and GTX 1060, you know, being able to get over 100 FPS means that certainly lower hardware can do it. This is the 6GB version, but now if we did want to try to even out those frame time graphs, you could enable like a max foreground FPS. Try to cut that down to about where your 1% lows are. So maybe if we kicked those down to 60, we could probably flatten out that frame time graph quite a bit, which is what we'll take a look at here. Although actually, since the 1% lows, ooh, those popped all the way up into the 30s. Yeah, I guess that didn't solve the problem. Actually seems like the 1% lows are worse now. So I don't know quite what's going on with that. But anyway, the point is that other than the little bits of stuttering, the actual just average FPS is pretty good. If we try to go up to the ultra settings, which includes the ultra textures, I have a feeling we might have a bit more of a problem here, possibly due to VRAM issues. Because when I was playing around with this on my 4090, and maybe we'll take a look at that by the end of the video, I did notice that the game at least wants to allocate a lot of VRAM on the highest settings. So we'll see what's going on here. Actually, looks like we're close to a 60 FPS experience at the ultra settings here, although once again, those spikes in the frame time graph are a little bit unpleasant, and that's kind of the main issue. I wonder if we tried to Vsync to 60, how that would go. Let's see, do we have Vsync here? Let's try Vsync. Maybe that'll behave better than the frame time cap. We'll find out. Actually, well, still getting some spikes there a bit, although the overall frame time graph is significantly smoother. It's not perfect. Anyway, the overall performance does seem pretty respectable, even on the GTX 1060, which means I think we ought to try out some higher-end GPUs on maybe some higher resolutions and settings. So let me pop in another GPU here. All right, I put in the RX 6700 XT, and I cranked up the resolution to 1440p and the graphics settings to ultra. There they are. You can see that we're running at the full resolution percentage, no FSR, none of that. Let's go ahead and see how we do. All right, I'll start running. I'll kick on the average FPS counter. And wow, seems a lot smoother than what we had on the 1060, although not surprising, completely different generation and class of GPU. Looks like average performance around 113 FPS running through this little town circle area. The 1% lows are significantly better. Looks like we're up around 100 FPS on the 1% lows, and that frame time graph looks smooth. Interesting to note, if you look at the VRAM counter, so that's the green memory line, it says 12 gigabytes are allocated, but I've also, next to that to the right, you can see the per process usage is only around 7 gigabytes so far in this scene. So it looks like while the game is hungry to allocate a ton of VRAM, it's not using all of the 12 gigabytes that it is actually allocated, which is important to note. But it does look like this is certainly using more than the 6 gigabytes of VRAM that the 1060 had, so that could have been related to the stuttering, although if we went down to lower settings, not that you really need to on this GPU, we could at least take a look at, okay, if we went down to medium settings, for example, I'm curious what kind of impact that has on performance as well as VRAM utilization. So let's go ahead and reset. We're now at 1440p medium. Looks like we're around 150 FPS now. And yeah, the VRAM allocation is down to about 6 gigabytes, and the actual usage is down closer to 4. So it looks like the medium settings would do a lot better on 4 gigabyte GPUs. I'm curious where the high settings ended up on that. So if we go to high settings, give it a second to apply. All right. Reset our frame rate counters. Yeah, it looks like the high settings are allocating closer to 8 gigabytes and reporting an actual usage around closer to 5.5 or 6. Yeah, so it looks like the different settings presets certainly are using different amounts of VRAM, which is important to note and all that. But anyway, it looks like the 6700 XT is having no issues crushing 1440p. So I think we might as well test out another GPU. Why don't we try out the 3060 Ti, which generally has similar performance, but has less VRAM. I'm curious how that'll go. All right, we're now on the RTX 3060 Ti, again at 1440p. Let's make sure no Vsync on. We've got the frame rate limit pushed all the way up. We're at the Ultra preset, looks like native resolution, no DLSS, no render scaling, all of that. Let's go ahead and see how this does. I'm curious whether or not VRAM could be an issue causing any stutters. Let's go ahead and find out. Again, usually this performs very similarly to the 6700 XT. Actually looking fairly similar performance-wise. Seems a bit lower, although the 1% lows do seem noticeably worse. Looks like we're down in the mid-70s on the 1% lows, when the 1% lows were around 100 on the 6700 XT. Now, the VRAM situation, I'm curious if I run around more of the city. It's showing only 4 gigabytes of actual usage and about 8 gigabytes of allocation. 8 gigabytes what it actually has. So I'm curious about that. Also, am I wrong, or was it daytime when we were testing the 6700 XT? I don't know if there's any way for me to adjust the day-night cycle, or it's just an online game and it just is what it is. So we might not be getting an exactly apples-to-apples comparison here. But I will say, while the performance did seem a bit smoother, especially in the 1% lows on the 6700 XT, I'm not seeing any major problems here. Overall performance is good here on the 3060 Ti, again, at least in this scene. And like I said, I can't really test combat very consistently in this game, so we're using the town with all the characters and whatnot. as our most consistent way to test. Like I said, it feels to me like, unless I'm misremembering, the day-night cycle is also not 100% consistent here. Should we test anything else on this 3060 Ti? Maybe drop down to high settings, which, if I remember right, on the 6700 XT did seem to better fit into the 8 GB or so limit. See if we get any meaningfully different 1% lows. Let's see. So overall performance now, we're closer to the 130-ish range. And yeah, I do think the frame time graph is a bit smoother and the 1% lows are doing a bit better. And it's certainly not trying to even allocate 8 GB this time. Now it's 6.5. So it's possible we were seeing a little bit of an issue from the VRAM. It didn't seem to be major, at least in this scene. But again, I was hardly testing as extreme of a scene as I'm sure, like end game mobs are going to be or anything like that. But let's pop in another GPU, maybe try something a little bit newer. All right, I decided to put in the 4070 Ti, and then we'll probably test it against the 7900 XT next. And I bumped it up to 4K resolution since we're already getting such high frame rates on our other GPUs at ultra settings. Seemed like we should kick up the difficulty here a little bit. Again, we're at 100% resolution scale, no DLSS yet, although this game does have frame generation. Maybe we'll kick that on since we're on a 40 series GPU. But for now, just native resolution, ultra settings, and here we go. So we will kick on the frame rate counter and run a few laps around the town. Okay, I'm noticing around 100 FPS average, which is good. The 1% lows, though, are down around 60. And a few little spikes in the frame time graph. It doesn't feel terrible or anything like that. But I don't like to see that wide of a gap between the 1% lows and the average. That's a little bit annoying. Let's see, the memory allocation is saying it's trying to allocate almost the 11. This is a 12 gigabyte GPU, so it's allocating about 11 of the 12. And it looks like the actual usage for the process is reporting closer to 7.5. So interesting stuff there. Now, we can actually play with settings a little bit more here on this one. One option, like I said, would be to go down to high settings and see if that changes our 1% lows much. Again, that might affect the VRAM. And so if it was VRAM related, this would be one of the ways that we might see that, although it doesn't completely confirm that. Looks like the 1% lows are still not up over 100 or anything like that. We're at a 120-ish average now, though. And in the 70s on the 1% lows. Again, still pretty good performance, but like I said, I wish the 1% lows were a little closer to the average. And let's go ahead and look at, okay, what if we actually went back to the ultra settings and use DLSS? So first we'll start without any frame generation. So we'll use DLSS quality, which at 4K resolution, DLSS quality in most games looks very, very good. And let's go ahead and try this out here. Looks like our performance is up to closer to 140 frames per second. So interesting to note that we got a bigger boost by enabling DLSS quality at ultra settings than we did by reducing ultra settings down to high settings. So I think that's at least interesting to note, although the 1% lows are still down kind of in those mid-70s. All right, let's go ahead and now, just for fun, kick on some frame generation. So we do have frame generation available. So this basically slightly delays. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I should probably kick on my Nvidia performance monitoring thing, which can show us the PC latency. So this is going to be important. So I'm going to kick on bottom left-hand corner of the screen. You can see the latency. And the reason why that's important is because if we enable frame generation, even though you get a higher frame rate, it usually slightly increases the latency. Now, the latency right now at these frame rates is really fast. So I'm not expecting it to be a problem. I just always want to emphasize that these frames are not the same as if the engine was actually producing more frames. This is more of a, this is adding in more smoothness between frames. Looks like we're stuttering a bit as it applies. So we're gonna give it a minute. Look at the, wait for that frame time graph to smooth out. Whoa. It seems to be having some trouble. Okay. Huh. Well, that's probably not how it's supposed to work. Okay. You know what? Let's try maybe turning it on and off again. Okay, we're turning frame generation off. I mean, we really don't need the frames from frame generation here, to be honest. But like, I just wanted to try it out. But looks like we may be having some issues getting it to apply. All right, well, anyway, it's looking like, at least in its current state, okay, did it actually apply this time? Well, the frame time graph is smoothed out, but weren't we getting about 130 frames per second without frame generation? Okay, well, all right, all I gotta say right here is that this is not the full release of the game, and perhaps we will get a better functioning frame generation when we do get a full full version of the game. Because right now it seems to be bugged, at least right on this testing, on this GPU at this time. Let's go ahead and kick in the 7900 XT from AMD and see if we get similar performance. All right, we now have the RX 7900 XT, and we're at 4K resolution, and it's 100% render scaling. I've kicked the FPS limit all the way up to 400, no FSR. We're at the Ultra preset. All of that, let's go ahead and see how we do. So run some laps with the frame rate counter on. Looks like we are in the upper 80s into the 90s at times range. So if I'm remembering correctly, this is a bit lower than what we were seeing on the 4070 Ti. If I remember right, that one was more up in the mid-90s, a little more frequently, a little closer to that 100 FPS mark. Overall, we're seeing the memory allocation showing 16 gigabytes and the usage showing closer to 12. So again, very interesting how this game seems to be handling VRAM. Seems to want to take more if there is more to take. 1% lows around 80, and the frame time graph looks fairly smooth. So interestingly, it seems like the overall performance is a bit lower than the 4070 Ti at these settings, but it looks like the 1% lows are a little bit better, and the frame time graph looks a bit smoother. So it looks like a bit of a mixed bag there overall, although fairly similar performance. They're both in that, 90 to 100 FPS sort of a range. Let's go ahead and try some things out. So on our Nvidia GPU, we tried out some DLSS. This game does have FSR2, so why don't we try on FSR2 quality. Reset the frame rate counters. All right. Looks like the frame rates are now more like 125-ish. If I remember right, the 4070 Ti with DLSS quality was around that 130-something FPS range. So again, seems like the averages are a little bit lower here, but the 1% lows are much better here. Looks like we're getting closer to a 100 on the 1% lows, and the frame time graph does look a lot smoother. So again, similar. Now, FSR2 image quality-wise, I usually don't feel like looks as good as DLSS does. Now at 4K with the quality setting, both do look usually pretty good. Running around here, I'm not seeing anything major to complain about. Perhaps if you had fast-moving mobs on the screen or something like that. It tends to be in motion where FSR2 can kind of sometimes get a little bit fizzly around the edges, that kind of a thing. And yeah, overall performance seems quite good. I guess we could also look at if we were going to stay at the native 4K resolution. What if we went down to high rather than ultra, just to see what happens. All right, seems like it's processed. And we will reset that frame rate counter. So, looks like we're over 100 FPS at the high settings. But again, not a significant improvement to the 1% lows, still kind of around that 80-ish mark. All right, I think let's try some other GPUs, because again, if you went down to 1440p, like it's already good performance at 4K. Like, what do you need to say here? Anyway, try something else. All right, I thought before we should go, I would put in the A770. So I actually did recently buy this. I don't think I've showed this off at all on my channel yet. By the time you're seeing this video, perhaps an unboxing video will make it out at some point. Anyway, so this is the ultra settings. I did drop down to 1440p for the A770. And this is a 16 gigabyte card. We've got all the Vsync turned off, frame rate, native resolution, frame rate limiter up to 400. Ultra settings, let's go ahead and see how we do. Let's kick on the average frame rate counter. And it's looking like we're around 100 frames per second at ultra settings 1440p. Frame time graph, not perfectly smooth. The 1% lows seem to be down in the mid-60s. Looking at the VRAM, it looks like it wants to allocate all 16 gigabytes, but then reports usage around closer to 9 gigabytes. So again, interesting how the game seems to want to allocate as much VRAM as you have, but then might not actually use it all. Now, I don't think there's XeSS in the option menu over here. Don't see it, although FSR is usable on Intel GPUs, so why don't we just go ahead and try it out. Let's click on FSR2 quality, see what happens there, reset the frame rate counter. Get a bit of a performance boost. We're up around 115-ish now, but the 1% low is still kind of hanging out in that mid-60s range. Overall, seems pretty smooth though. Obviously, this isn't a a full test of the game extensively on the Intel GPU, but nice to see it seems to be up and running with no obvious flaws, just on this kind of quick test. And as we run around town here, by the way, all the GPUs will get a little bit of a traversal stutter, I think, as you load in new areas and things like that. So you can see those spikes on the frame time graph. So overall thoughts, I haven't had hours and hours to play super far into the game or anything. But the game seems to perform well, it scales well. Like I said, you get a bit of the traversal stutters, which is a little bit, it'd be nice if it was smoother on that. But overall, it's very nice to see a game that, as far as I can tell in my testing so far, actually does scale to low and high-end hardware, isn't having any massive issues. There was a stutter right there. But like I said, it seems like it's more as it loads in new areas and all that rather than anything. Should we get a little gameplay? Can we find a bad guy before we go? All right, we stabbed a couple of ghosts, and yeah, there, there we go. All right, I'm gonna start editing all this stuff together, and so I can get this video actually out to you guys. Are we interested in more tests of this game when it actually launches? I think when it launches, it's supposed to actually have frame generation, not just frame generation, sorry, ray tracing, which I think might make the frame generation, if it's functioning, actually a little more interesting, because at this point, the DLSS 3 frame generation on the 40 series cards, it just doesn't seem like they really need it. The game's not really demanding enough, so All right, I think that's it for today. Stab a couple more skeletons, and we will move on to the editing process. Hope all of you have an excellent day.